Metaphysical and spiritual understandings. Early in the study of metaphysics, souls on Earth discovered that their thoughts were energetic transmissions capable of changing outer reality. Simple demonstrations of this principle by teachers were illustrated through reminding students that virtually everything in the world of humankind started as an idea in the mind. A few metaphysicians carried this idea to its extreme and suggested that all outer reality was a projection of thoughts held in the mind and that simply changing these thoughts would change the outer reality. There were a number of misunderstandings in this approach, which led to this channel's revision of the way the law of creative thought is now stated, as follows. The quality of your consciousness determines your experience of reality. At humanity's level of evolution, the natural world and the heavens are not direct products of human thought. Although souls influence their outer reality, a lot depends on the level of energy generated by their thoughts, and whether or not the thoughts are collective or individual. Individual thoughts primarily influence the individual timelines of souls, while collective thoughts generate collective timelines. A few individual souls are powerful enough to affect the collective timeline significantly, but at this point in the evolution of humanity, the number of such souls is only a few thousand. If enough souls believe something strongly enough, they create a dominant timeline, meaning one that supersedes all others and ends up manifesting in the physical world as part of the linear sequence of events. Because Earth is a fairly large place and has a wide variety of souls, it is possible to manifest simultaneous realities, each with different manifestations. An example is war and peace. If one group of souls desires peace and this group visualizes it intensely and projects thoughts and feelings of peace continuously, very likely the region of the Earth where these souls reside will become more peaceful. Henceforth, if another group is hell-bent, pun intended, on war, they will likely find themselves in a state of conflict. Because humanity is ultimately one being, the different states of consciousness of various members of humanity will influence each other. If a group of peaceful souls visualizes and prays for world peace and directs this peaceful energy to a distant part of the planet that is in conflict, it can have a significant positive impact on the warring factions. Unfortunately, this can also work the other way around. If the peaceful souls have not sufficiently cleared their own negativity, those souls at a distance that are engaged in war can have a negative influence on the lightworkers praying for peace. Ultimately, the ability of negatively oriented souls to hinder humanity, whether residing on Earth or influencing Earth from space or the astral realms, depends on the degree to which humanity has cleared their own negative aspects of consciousness. There is a reason some of the news items broadcast on Earth hold fascination for you while other stories mean almost nothing. You will be drawn to those dramas and traumas that trigger your own unresolved issues. In some cases, you have just enough empathy and triggering of your own memories of similar experiences to affect compassionate action. This can obviously be a good thing. The thought forms around this level of triggering go something like this. I understand how hard it is for Uncle John right now because I was in a similar place myself just a few years ago. In such a case, you might be able to demonstrate to Uncle John the steps you took to extricate yourself from a similar drama. More importantly than the how-to, is the resonant field you are able to create with Uncle John by temporarily matching his level of vibration. Yet because you have cleared the majority of the negativity relating to Uncle John's predicament, there is a relatively low risk of getting caught up in the details of Uncle John's life. In other words, the ability of Uncle John to trigger you has decreased due to the fact that you no longer have a charge on many of the details of his situation that are similar to what you went through. Your purpose in helping your struggling relative in the above example comes partly from pure love and compassion, but it also serves to welcome him into the new vibration you have discovered so you can experience the joy of ascension together. You do not have a personal investment in his progress, but nevertheless, you rejoice when he responds to your offering of assistance. Your Aunt Sally may be a different matter entirely. After carefully listening to your inner guidance and feeling the unease in your body as you approach the situation, you might determine that one of two conditions is occurring here. 1. You have not cleared enough of your own psychological effluvia to effectively help Aunt Sally because her condition is triggering you intensely and you are unable to detach from the drama enough to truly be of help. Or 2. You determine that you are not the right person to effectively communicate with Aunt Sally and help her integrate the unresolved negative patterns. Perhaps there is not enough similarity in experience, or you do not have the necessary understandings of her predicament. So you graciously bow out of a potential entanglement with her and suggest a therapist or healer who may be able to achieve results with Aunt Sally. This third party will have true detachment since he or she is an independent observer. You might also be able to find someone who has been through a similar experience and has reached a higher level of understanding than you have. Knowing when to intervene and when to let things run their course is one of the major spiritual lessons on the path. It is one that we, the founders, have had to learn on many levels and dimensions. All of your spirit guides work hard to make sure they are providing the optimum level of support and encouragement. There is a perfect balance point between trying too hard to help, which means being codependent and enabling, and being too detached, which often means giving advice from your head and not your heart. If you factor in the variabilities associated with free will, it can be quite challenging to find that perfect balance. You are walking in two worlds, actually three for a short time. Part of each day is still devoted to taking care of what you call your human business, which includes basic activities such as getting dressed, paying bills, answering phone calls, running errands, etc. Another part involves your fourth density pursuit of education, enlightenment and higher understanding. The majority of your relationships will likely have, as their primary goal, the pursuit of these higher qualities. A portion of your day might be spent activating your ascension template through meditation, sacred toning, breathing, visualizing or connecting with others who are on the path of ascension. You will vacillate between the three main aspects of self, human ego, enlightened mind and ascended being, perhaps several times a day, depending upon what is called for in any given moment. If you are fully dedicated to the path of ascension, you will set aside some time, however brief, to do your spiritual practice. You will have determined by now what works and what does not. Some activities will leave you feeling uplifted and inspired, while others will feel more like drudgery. More and more often, you will choose those activities that nourish and sustain your higher self. The most important aspect of being spiritually enlightened on this earth involves your ability to come from the reference point of your God self. You are a powerful, unlimited, creative spiritual being living in the material world. This is your identity. Your spiritual self is vast and your human self is tiny by comparison. Yet your human self is no less important than your spiritual self because it is an integral part of that self. Would you judge your right hand to be less important than the rest of your body just because it is a relatively small part of it? True transcendence means to move beyond the identification with the ego or human personality. From a higher perspective, you still have a human ego, but it has become a rather small part of the big picture. To quote this channel, it has become your humble servant, dutifully carrying out the will of the Master, your God self. Balancing the role of spirit guides. We observe the two extremes of codependency versus aloof isolationism, occurring in your relationship with spirit guides and teachers from other realms. Some of you rely too heavily on your spirit guides, while others fail to take advantage of the help that is freely offered you. Once again, this is a situation wherein you must straddle different worlds. The human self needs help, whether directly from God or through spirit guides or other members of humanity. Usually all three are called for at some point in your process. Learning to accept help when appropriate is an integral lesson on your path. Going back to the quicksand example, if your best friend falls in and you have no knowledge of how to help him, you would quickly run and get help from someone more experienced, or you would summon your inner courage and ask for guidance to come to you from on high. If you are the one in the quicksand, you would not simply shrug and say, "Go on ahead. I'll find my way out. I don't need any help." Conversely, if you are not in a life-threatening situation and simply feel a bit challenged, you do not want to be too quick to run for help. This might be a time to take responsibility for your own actions and learn some new ways of coping from your own inner wisdom. As a child, you might have relied on mommy to make the hurt feel better, but now you are on your own and the world expects you to attend to your own little hurts. Sometimes the hurts are too big or all-consuming and you need outer help. Learning to effectively ask for such assistance is an art. You might be challenged financially and seem to be temporarily unable to simply walk into a therapist's office and book a session, so you do some research and find a spiritual counselor who can accept you for little or no money. Or perhaps you seek out professionals and decide, after visiting 3 or 4 different types of therapists, that a particular one is perfectly suited to help with your specific emotional patterns. The same is true of spirit guides. There are millions of them. Most are eager and ready to assist. Some are too eager, and you will need to do some inner research here. You do not want to go running to your spirit guides every time some little aspect of your life goes out of balance. On the other hand, if your primary guide lovingly reminds you, "I am here for you. How can I help?" you do not want to ignore him or tell him to go away and leave you alone. You have a contract with your spirit guides. It is their job to determine, to the best of their ability, when to communicate with you and when to remain silent. Some souls have spirit guides that are very hands-on, while others tend to have spirit guides that only show up in dire situations. To determine the best response to spirit guides and the best level of involvement with them, you need to overcome any past patterns of pride or arrogance that say, "I am a mature person. Now I rely only on myself. I don't need anyone else." This can be as destructive as expecting mommy to rescue you every time something adverse occurs in your life. Most souls have a variety of spirit guides that specialize in different forms of help. Knowing who to call on is part of the process of discernment. In addition to us, this channel has several other guides and groups that work with him. We are not always the best choice for any given situation. Typically, his higher self will make the determination who to call. Occasionally, one of his guides or groups will be proactive and contact him first, but it is always with a suggestion, never a demand. If you have any spirit guides that demand change or obedience, it's time to kick them out of your aura. As you go through ascension, you will find that your sources of help change periodically. You may outgrow some of your spirit guides and it might be necessary to end the relationship. You have a right to refuse service from spirit guides and you have a right to remove any guides that are no longer serving you on your journey regardless of whether or not they are happy to go. When dismissing them, it is best to say, "Go in peace. I release you into the light," or something similar. You may acquire new guides as you are ready for them. Be sure and welcome your new guides and express your gratitude for having them in your life. It is not absolutely essential to know your spirit guides. If you do know them, it is not necessary to know their names. Names of spirit guides will vary, depending on your language and level of awareness. The only real value of a name is that it sets up a resonant sound frequency when you say the name and it triggers a conscious memory of the guide being called. Do not be overly concerned if you do not know your specific guides. You can use a general invocation, such as, "I now call forth my benevolent spirit guides to assist me. Come forth, beloved beings of light. Thank you, wonderful beings." Many of you have asked, how do I tell the difference between my own higher self and my spirit guides? Generally speaking, spirit guides will identify themselves at the onset of communication. They will have a specific energy signature, which may consist of a feeling, series of thoughts, visions, impressions, or intuitive knowing that has a certain quality. In this channel's case, his regular guides always appear in the same general location within his etheric field, with a consistent energy and presence. The more you practice contacting your spirit guides and working with them, the easier it will be to recognize imposters. Unfortunately, there are a lot of mostly well-meaning entities that want to help so badly that they will make false claims in order to get your allegiance. In a few rare cases, very dark beings will claim to be of the light. Pay close attention to how you feel when you call in your spirit guides. If you feel heavy, confused, anxious, or angry during the process, visualize golden light surrounding your body and clear your aura. Tell your guides you will work with them later when you feel more centered. Ask that only those beings that are 100% of God's loving light be allowed in your space. Command that all others leave your space immediately. Contact this channel or another teacher for additional spiritual and psychic protection techniques. There are a lot of teachers on Earth available to help you contact your spirit guides, so we will refrain from spending any more time on this subject. We will now turn our attention to the subject of soul psychology. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. As you go through the portals, you will know that you are moving forward and that there is really no turning back. Nevertheless, it is the nature of the spiritual path to go through what this channel calls periods of rapid soul growth, followed by plateaus. The ideal soul path looks somewhat like a stairway to heaven. You have surges of momentum forward, called periods of rapid soul growth, where everything is moving quickly, manifesting easily, and resolving wonderfully. Then you have those periods where it seems nothing is working, energy is sluggish, and there is little or no momentum. In this channel's earlier book, Earth Changes and Beyond, there is a section on the psychology of soul growth, discussing integration, consolidation, purification, etc. We suggest you reread that section thoroughly. Basically, for those who have not read our prior work, it states that some parts of you evolve more quickly than others, and often it is necessary to stop and wait for the slower parts to catch up. In addition, you have your soul cycles, the cycles of humanity and the natural rhythms of the cosmos. It is important to be aware of these cycles and use them to your advantage. Do not make the mistake of attributing undue power and importance to them, however. Some souls will refrain from taking action because Mercury is in retrograde, or it is the wrong time of the month. If you are truly experiencing an inward soul cycle, then perhaps it is best to postpone action. But make sure you are listening to true inner wisdom and not simply making excuses because of an unresolved fear of acting. Learn to recognize your natural soul cycles. Learn to see the stairway nature of soul growth. Much of the time, you will want to simply allow your soul to express its cyclical nature and structure your life accordingly. One of the major issues souls are having at this time on Earth is the feeling of overwhelm associated with busy lives. Stressful lifestyles seem to be in fashion on the planet right now. This is not a requirement for living here. You can learn to say no to those commitments that just do not feel right. You can let go of the negative belief that says you must work hard every day just to make enough money to put food on the table. That may have been true in some of your past lifetimes, but things have changed. You have technological advances and spiritual energies coming into Earth right now that can propel you out of survival mentality very quickly. Regardless of how hopeless or overwhelming your life might look, you can change it. You can make time for your spiritual practice. In fact, you must make time for it. That does not necessarily mean sitting in meditation for hours every day, but it does mean taking time out from your busy schedule to remember why you are here in the first place. If you do not heed your inner advice to slow down and let go of stress, your body will find a way of getting your attention, and it will likely not be pleasant. 80% of all illness is emotionally based, and even the 10% directly caused by stressful lifestyles is usually emotionally based as well, because if you did not have unresolved emotional issues and core negative beliefs to clear, you would likely not believe you must work so hard every day just to survive. For some of you, survival is not an issue, but you still find people and situations distracting you at every turn. A simple process is to stop what you are doing and ask, what is the purpose of this activity? How is it assisting me in my soul growth? This does not mean you must forego pleasurable activities and spend all your time processing emotions or meditating. Your body will tell you when you get out of balance. If you are tired all the time, something needs to change. If you have so much energy you cannot sleep at night, you may be out of balance in a different way. Balancing quiet time with activity, sedentary time with exercise, and alone time with social interaction is essential. Diet and nutrition for ascending souls. A question many of you have asked involves diet and nutrition. How do your eating habits change as you ascend? How should they change? Our usual response to this question is to ask you to tune in more deeply to your body and pay attention to how it feels when you eat, and especially, after you eat. As you increase your vibration, dense food will tend to drop away naturally if you do not have any emotional attachments or addictions involved. Bodies do not like sudden change. This is one of the reasons most diets do not work. The body feels as though it is being forced to adhere to a strict standard, and its usual response is either to rebel or shut down. The emphasis with diet should not be focusing on what to avoid, but rather, to ask the question, what does my body need for maximum vitality and energy? Then concentrate on devising a way of acquiring those things that make you feel the lightest, clearest and most energetic. By energetic, we do not mean a sudden rush of energy followed by a crash, as in the case of most sweets, but rather, sustained energy over several hours. You will need to experiment a bit. Certainly, it is wise to do some research. We suggest reading about blood types, Ayurvedic philosophy, herbs and natural remedies to correct nutritional imbalances. This channel acquired information about blood types and then realized he was already eating 98% in alignment with what is recommended for his blood type. That is because he tuned into his body and discovered what felt good and what did not. It is important to recognize the difference between cravings stemming from unresolved emotional issues and genuine hunger and bodily desire for a certain type of food. In rare cases, these will overlap, but usually you can tell the difference in retrospect by how you feel after eating. When indulging in a craving, you might later feel lethargic or tired versus the satisfied feeling after eating a food your body really wants. After giving some general nutritional advice in this section, we will follow up with a brief discussion on habits and addictions in order to address the issue of cravings and self-destructive behavior. We will take a brief look at several popular addictions, with our recommendations on methods of healing. Here is our general nutritional advice. About 3/4 of humanity has a body structure that desires the basic hunter-gatherer foods, which are simple carbohydrates, simple fats and regular protein. Only about 1/4 of humanity can tolerate complex carbohydrates such as grains, bread, pasta, pastry and such. If you feel bloated, tired, gassy, or suffer from heartburn after eating these foods, you are probably among the 3/4 who cannot tolerate wheat, gluten or large portions of complex carbohydrates. For you, we recommend a diet with lots of fresh organic vegetables, a moderate amount of fresh fruit, not juiced, and regular protein, in the form of organic meats, fermented soy and supergreen powders, such as spirulina and chlorella. Meat consumption should be moderate, with emphasis on poultry and seafood. If you are vegetarian, make sure you have adequate amounts of protein at each meal. If you eat soy products, make sure they are fermented and organic, tempeh, miso, etc., since almost all soy that is not certified organic has been genetically modified. Tofu and soy margarine can clog the system and elevate estrogen levels. Isolated soy protein is not recommended. Generally speaking, the less processed the food, the better it is for your body. Processed food is usually high glycemic, which means it converts very quickly to sugar in the body. This wreaks havoc with insulin, which regulates blood sugar levels. Both hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia can be caused by too much or too little sugar in the diet. Some doctors recommend only 15 to 25 grams of fructose from organic fruit daily. Avoid all diet and regular soda. Choosing a diet full of raw vegetables, with minimal processed food and little or no sugar, can put type 2 diabetes into remission within a few weeks, in the majority of cases. Another problem with processed foods is the nature of the chemicals used to preserve or enhance the flavor. Be especially wary of MSG, monosodium glutamate, often disguised as autolyzed yeast extract, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, and natural flavors. Even Bragg's amino acids, which has natural glutamic acid, converts a percentage into glutamates. About half of the population is allergic to glutamates and most do not know it. Other chemicals to avoid include high fructose corn syrup, aspartame, sodium nitrite, sodium benzoate, BHT, BHA, propylene glycol, and many others. In Europe, it is important to avoid E321, E322, E323, E621, E622, E623 and most of the E900 series where artificial sweeteners are found. In addition to the more obvious advice above, it is important to dispel a few myths about food. Let's start with the myth of dairy products. Milk is the perfect food for baby cows. In fact, we note that humanity is the only species that drinks the milk of other animals. In its raw state, there are some beneficial properties to cow's milk, but generally speaking, dairy products create excess mucus, leading to enhanced and aggravated head colds, influenza and various other maladies. This channel gave up dairy products almost 30 years ago and has had almost no colds or outbreaks of influenza since that time. If you do use dairy products, avoid pasteurized ones, since the heating of these foods kills most of the nutritional value and makes them difficult for the body to recognize and digest properly. While giving up of mucus-producing foods can greatly reduce the occurrence rates of certain illnesses, there are, of course, other factors that contribute to the general well-being of the body, including your attitudes about food and whether or not you eat only when you are truly hungry. Most humans eat out of boredom, for social reasons, or because the food is there in front of them. If you go to potlucks, buffets and smorgasbords, it is very easy to overdo it, not only by eating too much, but taking items that are not good for your body. A further word about soy. Eating natural organic soybeans in moderation is okay, but in general, soy is best consumed in its fermented state, which includes tempeh, miso and a few other dishes. Regular tofu, soy milk, soy margarine and soy protein isolate are not recommended. Make sure your soy is free of genetically modified ingredients. Do not buy anything that lists soybean oil as an ingredient unless it specifically indicates the oil is GMO-free. The best drink is natural spring water, served in glass containers. If you want variety, use a bit of lemon, or green tea, or make up a batch of natural sun tea, in summer. A small amount of full-bodied beer or ale, or a glass or two of red wine on occasion is okay, but pay attention to the level of acidity in your body, as alcoholic drinks can quickly lower your overall pH. You want your body to be slightly alkaline. We do not recommend drinking high pH waters put through some fancy machine. If you do use one of these expensive alkalinizing filters, choose the setting closest to the 7.0 to 8.0 range, and drink plenty of natural spring water in addition to the high pH water. A small amount of alkaline water will help neutralize overacidity, but a large amount will trigger the body's acid-producing response as it seeks to restore balance. Your stomach needs to be at a low pH in order to digest food, so go easy on highly alkaline water. The best way to alkalinize your body is through consumption of dark green leafy vegetables, such as chard and kale, along with supergreen powders. Make sure your supergreens do not have a significant amount of added sugar. Speaking of sugar, a small amount of natural cane juice or honey is okay. Avoid any forms of processed sugar and all artificial sweeteners. Probably the best sweetener is stevia. We promised to keep our answer brief, so let us finish up with a few comments about mineral balance. We observe that a lot of female problems, such as prolonged and painful menstrual cycles, are due to imbalances of minerals. Copper, zinc, calcium, magnesium and selenium are the 5 biggest contributors to hormonal health. We strongly suggest avoiding all forms of synthetic calcium. The body does not know what to do with it, and as a result, you may go from calcium deficiency to overabundance with just a few doses. Synthetic calcium builds up in the joints and actually promotes osteo-related imbalances, including arthritis. If you use a calcium supplement, make sure it is derived completely from whole foods. Avoid calcium carbonate entirely, the active ingredient in most antacid medications. Almost all heartburn will cease when you reduce or eliminate complex carbohydrates and eat a balance of carbs, fat and protein at each meal. You can get most of your minerals, in proper balance, from eating moderate amounts of raw nuts and seeds. Use naturally processed, virgin, olive and coconut oils, as well as cold-pressed flaxseed oil. Flax, chia and hemp seeds are the best sources of fiber and are also rich in essential minerals. If you take a mineral supplement, make sure it comes in powder or liquid form, not tablets or capsules, which are harder to break down. Okay, we are not quite done. A word about chocolate. Small amounts of dark chocolate with minimal sugar and processing can actually be beneficial. Avoid milk chocolate. Use products with a cacao number above 70%. You can buy raw organic cacao at health food stores. If you make your own chocolate candy, use a little agave syrup for sweetness, but not too much, as agave is somewhat high glycemic. Finally, let us mention the subject of portions. There are many conflicting levels of advice on this topic. We recommend several small meals throughout the day because this way the body's survival mechanism does not get triggered. When you go several hours between meals, the body often feels it is not getting enough nutrition and so it sends a signal to the brain to store the next meal as fat in case it is the last one for a while. You can pay close attention to portion size and know when you have had enough. If you feel tired after a meal, or especially 2 to 3 hours after eating, it is either because you overate, or because you included too many complex carbohydrates with your meal. Do not eat anything of significance within 3 hours of bedtime. A light snack is sometimes okay, but experiment a bit and see what arrangement best contributes to a good night's sleep. Remember the adage, everything in moderation, including moderation. Balanced eating is much more beneficial than strict dieting. If you feel deprived, your diet is likely not going to work. If it requires sudden changes and strict adherence, your body will probably rebel. Once you do have a good eating regimen in place, it is okay to cheat a little here and there, as long as it does not get out of hand. When traveling, go ahead and have a chicken salad or lightly breaded fish at a restaurant once in a while, but when you get back home, go back to free-range organic chicken and broiled fish. As you move through ascension, heavier foods will naturally drop away. This does not mean you should beat yourselves up if you are still eating meat and are under the belief that ascending souls must be vegetarian. Your body probably needs to stay grounded to the earth, and for a while, meat is a good way to stay grounded. Alright, we're still not quite finished with this topic. One last word, this time about genetically modified organisms. It is not a simple matter of just stating that GMOs are bad for you. This may be the case more often than not, but really it is about whether or not your body recognizes the molecular configuration of a food or nutrient and can process it. Some GMOs are relatively stable and do not differ substantially from their natural counterparts, while others use exotic grafting, splicing and hybridization that the body cannot recognize. In addition, the primary reason for genetic modification is to create resistance to certain pesticides so that crops can be grown without interference from weeds. The relatively high concentrations of toxic pesticides used on many GMO crops are not completely eliminated during processing of the food. We conclude, finally, our discussion of diet and nutrition with Table 3, a list of diet types and how they fare in the vibrational scale. The ones at the top of the list are consistent with higher vibrations, while the ones at the bottom of the list are the densest and tend to hold back soul evolution. Table 3 dietary stages on the path of ascension, highest to lowest. Pure ingestion of prana, life force, no air, water or food. Breatharian, ingestion of air only, no food or water. Water only, no ingestion of food. Liquid supergreens, liquid vitamins and minerals only, raw vegetable juice fasting. Raw vegan diet, fresh vegetables and some fresh fruit, vegan unprocessed, fruit, vegetables, nuts and seeds. Vegan processed, includes grains, sugars, caffeine, etc. Vegetarian, includes dairy and eggs. Partial vegetarian, no red meat or dairy products, mostly omnivore, everything except red meat, omnivore, all types of food. Junk food diet, fast food, mostly fried and processed. It is only logical to follow our discussion of diet with some words on addiction. Many of you have asked, how do we change bad habits and heal addictions? Addictions and how to heal them. Addiction occurs because you believe that some process or substance is going to fulfill needs that have not been met in a healthy way. An example might be addiction to sugar. Perhaps you received sugar as a reward for good behavior when you were young and, as a result, came to equate sugar with receiving love and attention. Then, during periods when you perceive a lack of love and attention, you turn to sugar for solace. Below, we are going to list several addictions, along with our advice for healing them. Part 1 – Process addictions. These are addictions to certain behaviors or states of consciousness that do not directly involve substances ingested into the body. We have listed them in order of prevalence among your society. Addiction to the ego, also rational mind, intellect. This is by far the most common and hardest addiction to heal. Even when a soul knows that it is not healthy to identify with the ego, such identification continues to happen. It takes a strong resolve and usually therapy and lots of healing before detachment from the ego is possible. The I, me, mine mentality gives rise to selfishness, self-centeredness and narcissism, and is responsible for clinging to a false sense of self-importance. Closely related is our next addiction. Addiction to power. Those who are attached to ego will have a deep-rooted sense of inadequacy. To overcompensate for this perceived sense of lack, souls become obsessed with power. Typically they will seek to dominate other souls, or amass great wealth, or seek positions of responsibility where they can be the boss over others in order to feel a sense of power. The fear of powerlessness is at the root of this addiction. Addiction to money. This is, of course, related to the addiction to power, above, and the addiction to material things, below. But in addition, money represents potential energy or the ability to be free and independent. Souls who feel powerless or helpless to change their circumstances may falsely believe that money alone will change things in their favor. While this might be temporarily true, an inner feeling of imprisonment has very little to do with actual independence, financial or otherwise. More than likely, such feelings stem from unresolved trauma in this or a past life where the soul was actually imprisoned or lived in a highly controlled environment, such as being a slave. Often, souls will overachieve in order to prove themselves worthy to authoritative parents, or to win their approval. Addiction to material things. This addiction is closely related to ego and power addictions. The soul that feels empty inside will tend to fill up his life with all manner of physical distractions, toys, in order to avoid looking at the perceived state of emptiness. In this category would be addiction to shopping, addiction to spending money, and addiction to keeping up with the Joneses. Addiction to excitement and entertainment. Avoiding loneliness is one of the ego's primary motivations, and because souls who perceive themselves as separate can never feel satisfied, no matter how many friends, family and activities are crammed into their busy lives, they will continuously seek new forms of excitement and entertainment. Thrill rides that pump adrenaline are a favorite, along with horror movies, news of catastrophes, gossip, and preoccupation with pop culture icons. People in this category worry more about the wardrobe of their favorite celebrity, or who she is dating, than with their own lonely state of mind. A subset of this addiction involves gambling and also criminal activities. The excitement of winning or losing, or avoiding or getting caught provides an adrenaline rush. Addiction to people, the socialite lifestyle. Some people can never be alone because then they would have to face their own issues, so they fill up their lives with superficial relationships. There is always a party to go to, or a social function to attend. While some of this can be healthy, the socialite depends on getting noticed by peers, wearing the right dress or business suit, and in general being approved of by others. This one could be reworded: addiction to receiving the approval of others. Addiction to sex and relationships. Souls who do not feel connected to their God presence within will seek to feel complete in the arms of another. Pop culture is based on the idea that a soul needs to find his other half in order to be complete. Souls in this category run the gamut between impersonal sex in order to maintain the illusion of intimacy on the one hand, to clingy, codependent relationships in order to avoid feeling lonely, on the other hand. There are a lot of good books on this subject, so we will keep our discussion here brief. Addiction to religious beliefs. Underneath blind allegiance to a faith or way of life is usually a deep fear of the unknown, sometimes reinforced with guilt and the threat of punishment if one does not rigidly follow scripture. Those who feel separated from God hold a deep fear of being abandoned by the divine and may cling to a religious belief in the hopes that their image of God will somehow reward them in some way. Many souls have a distant memory of being persecuted for straying from the prevalent beliefs of the time and are fearful of the consequences of thinking for themselves. Addiction to being right. We could have placed this one under addiction to ego, or addiction to seeking the approval of others, but there can be a lot of different reasons why a soul might become addicted to being right. Humans are conditioned to strive and succeed in school by getting the answers right. Unfortunately, a lot of the deeper mysteries of life do not involve right or wrong, and therefore, this leads to the addiction to duality. Having a black and white viewpoint of life creates tunnel vision. Such souls are likely to be satisfied with simple answers, never using critical thinking to investigate deeper meanings. There are many more process addictions, but these are the basic ones. Some of the solutions to healing process addictions can be found in the section on therapy techniques given earlier in this chapter. We suggest you go through the list of tools offered in this book and apply your process addictions accordingly. Of course, the first step in healing is self-awareness, which includes admitting you have the addiction. Obtaining the help of family, friends and professional therapists and healers is essential. In some cases, a 12-step program might be appropriate, but we urge caution for the reasons given below under addiction to alcohol. Let us now turn our attention to food and drug addictions. Part 2: Substance addictions. The definition of substance addiction involves the idea that in order to attain a certain state of consciousness, one must depend upon ingesting a certain food or chemical into the bloodstream. Addiction to food, overeating. We have already talked about this to some extent in our section on diet and nutrition. Overeating usually stems from stuffing emotions. By filling yourselves with food, you receive a feeling of fullness that often masks uncomfortable feelings. Frequently, the emotions being sublimated with food involve feeling deprived, neglected, rejected, lonely, or abandoned. Other times overeating is centered around boredom, which is a negative emotion related to suppressed frustration, or apathy, suppressed helplessness or powerlessness. Refusing to eat, anorexia, or purging after eating, bulimia, are variations on a theme. Often with anorexia there is a deep feeling of self-disgust, self-judgment or self-condemnation, buried under the militant desire to forego oral satisfaction. While on the surface, anorexia might masquerade as a fear of becoming overweight, fear of disapproval from others or fear of illness and death. Without self-judgment or self-condemnation, the soul will eventually cease the destructive behavior and start eating again. Addiction to sugar. This is the most common food addiction on Earth. About half the souls in Western societies are addicted to sugar or one or more of its derivatives. Some sugar addictions are quite serious, while others are mild. Sugar addiction is the #1 cause of type 2 diabetes and is a major contributor to heart disease, cancer and many chronic illnesses. We have already mentioned one of the causes of sugar addiction, equating sweets with love, but there is also a physiological component. The body starts to crave the high, temporarily created by sugar before the inevitable crash. Sugar is extremely physically addicting. After only one meal with dessert, the body may start expecting to have a dessert after every meal, salivating excessively in anticipation of such. The difference between a molecule of sugar and one of alcohol involves the rearranging of one hydroxyl ion. In fact, sugar is a necessary ingredient in the production of alcohol. Addiction to alcohol. This is generally considered to be the most destructive of the substance addictions. Every year alcohol directly or indirectly kills hundreds of thousands of humans, whether through automobile accidents, murders, or liver failure. Small amounts of certain alcoholic beverages can be beneficial to the human body, but there is a fine line. Souls who drink in order to be more social or to loosen up, may be depending on a substance to become more extroverted or less self-conscious. While this is the psychological component of alcohol addiction, the physiological factor kicks in and is compounded by the tolerance factor. This means that the more you drink, the more you need in order to attain the same level of high. As with sugar, the high is followed by a crash. Usually the addict, during the hangover, swears he will never touch another drink, but as soon as the hangover wears off, he is back on a binge. The Alcoholics Anonymous program has produced many beneficial results. However, we agree with this channel that many recovering alcoholics keep affirming they are alcoholics far beyond the point where such a declaration is helpful. At first, denial is an issue. The whole purpose of the first principle, step 1 of the 12 steps of AA, is to help the addict out of the state of denial. However, once that is achieved, it is important for the recovering addict to focus on positive, creative behaviors that enhance life, rather than starting each meeting with, "My name is Alan and I am an alcoholic." If denial is faced directly, with increasing self-awareness, the recovering addict will learn to recognize the difference between a healed soul and a dry drunk. A dry drunk is someone who will, under just the right conditions, begin drinking again, which means the underlying emotional issues have not been completely healed. The underlying issues may include an unwillingness to face the harshness of life, refusal to acknowledge one's own shadow self, dark side, attempts to cover over unhealed grief and loss from the recent or distant past, and a desire to acquire a false bravado to cover up deep feelings of inadequacy. Alcohol addiction involves both physical and psychological dependency. Heavy drinkers often need to dry out over a period of time to reduce their physical dependency before they are ready to face the tough psychological issues that drove them to drinking in the first place. Addiction to caffeine, amphetamines and stimulants. You may be wondering why we have lumped these together, since you probably consider a cup of coffee to be a far cry from popping speed or injecting crystal meth. Again, this dissertation is not a handbook on how to overcome addictions. We are just hitting on the main points to round out our discussion on the blocks to spiritual progress. Our point here is to detail why people use stimulants. Their use stems from a general dissatisfaction with the state of human affairs, both personally and planetarily. It can be as simple as wanting more energy because your life is too stressful. How easy it is to pop a pill to keep going when it is 10 o'clock at night and you have not yet found time to study for the exam tomorrow. Or you are on a long drive and need to stay awake. The list of excuses is long, but the process is the same. You begin to depend on caffeine or another stimulant to keep you going when your energy starts to lag. The biggest causes of energy drain are unresolved emotional issues and stressful lifestyles. If you are eating a healthy diet, have cleared most of your negative emotions, and lead a balanced life, you will have plenty of energy most of the time. Denial is the #1 cause of turning to stimulants. Denial of anything takes a tremendous amount of energy. The next time you are tempted to reach for a stimulant, ask, what am I denying in myself? How am I depleting my own energy field? Sometimes it is about having unrealistic expectations. You are working full-time, going to school at night, raising a family, and attempting to lead a spiritual life, getting 4 hours of sleep per day. Drinking coffee to keep up this lifestyle will temporarily seem to make it easier to cope, but eventually the bottom will fall out and you will either get sick or become disillusioned, and no pill or jolt will work when that occurs. Restructure your priorities. Assume, for now, that you have finite energy and that it needs to be channeled according to your core values and long-term goals. Begin eating a healthy snack or substituting decaffeinated coffee in place of your usual routine. Learn to say no to more commitments than you can handle. Seek help as appropriate. Addiction to cigarettes, smoking. This soul has worked with numerous clients who are, or were, struggling with this addiction. According to many nicotine addicts, it is more difficult to quit smoking than to stop using heroin. As with alcohol, there are 2 steps to stopping smoking. You must first deal with the physical addiction and then with the psychological one. We suggest facing these in a sequential manner rather than trying to heal both types of addiction simultaneously. With nicotine addiction, the physical dependency must be addressed by gradually reducing the amount of nicotine entering the body. Yes, we know some have quit, cold turkey, but for many, this is just too sudden a change. Therefore, we recommend slowly reducing the number of cigarettes each day until the number reaches 0. It might be helpful to replace the cigarettes normally smoked with straws or chewing gum. A nicotine patch may be helpful for some people, but it is not a long-term solution since the body is still receiving nicotine. Once the physical addiction is reduced substantially, work begins on the psychological cravings. During the initial reduction in cigarette usage, therapy sessions are helpful, but mostly so the client can talk about his or her experience with reducing the number of cigarettes. As the nicotine wears off, therapy can proceed with more dynamic techniques. The most effective technique is called awareness in detail, and involves staying centered and focused on the details of smoking. Notice the craving the minute it arises. What does it feel like? What color is it? How does it move in the body? Describe how the saliva begins under the tongue and moves into the rest of the mouth. Follow the process of acquiring the cigarettes. How do you light them? Which hand do you use? Notice how you hold the cigarette. As you bring it to your mouth, what thoughts are going through your head? Stay with the breathing process as you inhale the smoke. Imagine you can see the smoke entering your lungs. How does it feel to exhale? Where do you place the cigarette in between puffs? How does it burn? Some therapists recommend varying the way you hold the cigarette, such as using your non-dominant hand, or lighting it in a different way, matches instead of lighter, etc. In order to stay more conscious during the smoking process. For some clients, it is important to have a long-term goal and reward system in place once you stop smoking completely. An example would be to take the money you normally spend on cigarettes and put it in a piggy bank. At the end of a year, take the money out and reward yourself with a vacation. Illegal and prescription drugs. Most illegal drugs are well known for their addictive properties, but a lot of people are not aware of the addictive properties of prescription drugs. We cannot legally give medical advice, but we will say this. If a drug is prescribed for pain, use it for the smallest amount of time possible, which means until the pain is bearable. If you believe you can get by with a non-addictive substance to manage the pain, then forego the prescription. SSRI drugs, antidepressants, are particularly controversial because they seem to be overprescribed, especially in the case of children. If you are severely depressed and suicidal, your doctor may be justified in prescribing an antidepressant. In fact, these drugs do save lives. However, it is our observation that approximately 90% of the time, the patient can recover adequately without taking risks. These substances tend to clip both the low and high end of consciousness, making you a middle person. This means you will be less depressed, but also less excited about life in general. You might find impairment of your psychic and intuitive abilities as a result of taking risks. Getting back to the subject at hand, these drugs are addicting, meaning that you will likely go through withdrawal if you take them over a long period of time and then suddenly quit. Withdrawal symptoms can be quite severe with some drugs. The mind gets used to being prompted to produce a certain amount of serotonin, and when the prompt is taken away, its dependency becomes obvious. After a severe illness, accident or situation involving pain, a prescription drug can be appropriate, but the idea is to get off them as quickly as possible without jeopardizing your recovery. Unfortunately, the pharmaceutical industry depends on having a ready supply of addicts to keep their sales robust, and they subsidize doctors heavily for promoting their products. Every year, thousands of patients die from prescription drug complications, side effects and withdrawal. You can research this on your own, but take our word for it, these drugs are a last resort in most cases. In summary, this chapter has focused on the inner state of things as you go through the earth changes. We have covered a great deal of psychology and behavior, as well as the more philosophical and metaphysical aspects of inner growth. Finally, we have gone into some depth in discussing the blocks to spiritual progress. We hope this rather extensive discussion on self-awareness and the spiritual path has been useful to you. In the next chapter, we will explore some of the outer changes you can expect as you move deeper into the portals and galactic shift. We are the founders. Good day.